Another thing is the confusion between US and Canadian law. There is a myth that people with disabilities in Canada have the same level of rights, particularly children, as in the US. And the reality is that US disability legislation that entitles children to service does not apply to Canada. In Canada, it's if the provincial government has the funding available, then the service is available. In the US, there's a federal requirement that a much higher level of early intervention funding is available by law. So it's a different system. Many of the books that we recommend have great advocacy resources in them, but we always say be careful if you're looking at something, don't make the assumption that you're using American law in Canada. Now, in reality, there are, how the rubber hits the road in the US for families is very different, and it's not that the situation is all roses across the border. I think we all know that that's not the case. And across the country, in each province, things are done differently. So although the basic rules of advocacy or tips I'm going to give you today apply no matter where you live, it's also important to realize what the jurisdiction that you live in, what the legal requirements are. So, as I said, the Canadian reality is that we lack a comprehensive national strategy to legislate a minimum level of support and services for children and adults with disabilities. Each province has the authority to determine these things because in Canada is a federation, with each province having very strong rights in terms of what they control. So every province has the right to control education, social services, health. And this means that there's no minimum requirement and no equity of services between provinces. So that kind of work to change that requires systematic advocacy. Often this is done through our provincial autism societies. I'm very happy to report we now have a strong national alliance, the Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorder Alliance. It's working to set national standards to provide support for those with autism. And you can find out more at the link there. I think what's quite exciting about, now we've just had a new government elected in Canada, the previous government was not in favor of any national standards. This government has made quite a different, has quite a different attitude. So it's a good time to advocate for national standards so that people with disabilities, whether they're children or adults, can live with dignity. I also want to bring out this Canadian Association for Community Living advocates nationally for community inclusion for those with cognitive disabilities, right? So, you know, someone with autism can have an IQ in the genius range. Not everybody. I want to, you know, like we all know that this idea that we all have a Rain Man living in our house is not a very accurate assessment. But for those who have cognitive disabilities, what they require looks a bit different to those who have IQs in the normal range. And although people say to you, IQ doesn't matter, it really does. It does matter in terms of what resources are available for your child as they get older. And so we have a wonderful workshop online by Dr. Suzanne Jacobson, which I really recommend for all of you advocates about really having your child tested, what to look for, how it helps you hold the school district accountable to provide a program that fits that child's needs. So often, if you don't know, and I'm going on a tangent here, but if you don't understand what your child's academic ability is, and an IQ is only about their academic ability. It doesn't mean that they can get across the street, buy a quart or a liter of milk and get back again with the right change, right? It might mean that they could tell you very quickly how much milk is produced in Canada in any year, but it doesn't mean they're functional. However, for access to services, understanding what their IQ is, their academic ability, is important, because if a child is being taught way beneath their ability or way above their ability, you're missing out really supporting that child academically. And the only way with a lot of children with autism that we can get any idea of that is by testing, right? Because they are very good at kind of confusing us as to what their actual abilities are. And the geographical dimension, we do have to have some sympathy for policymakers and government in rolling out services across a country that is as large as ours and is so geographically diverse, you know, whether it's mountain ranges, whether it's climate issues. It is very complex to serve our country properly, and one of the things that ACT is doing is to try and make as much as possible available online. Again, there's no equity between our rural and urban areas in terms of medical services. And again, all of these things we have to think about when we advocate. In BC, therapy is provided through, or the funding for therapy is provided through the Ministry of Children and Family Development, and there are often long waiting lists for therapeutic services except for autism funding. So if you have a diagnosis of autism, then you do actually have access to funding, which doesn't mean in your small community that there are many professionals there to serve you. And so that's when you call ACT and say, here's where I'm living, who do you think would come and provide services here? How else can we do this? And we actually, on our registry for autism service providers now, we will indicate with a little airplane the consultants who are prepared to travel, you know, and those who are prepared to work, you know, maybe come once or twice a year to your community. And I always say, you know, get a bunch of parents together, find someone you want to work with, save that money on travel, right? Work together. And then, you know, use Skype or other forms of communication between sessions. When Adam was diagnosed, we used to have to bring a consultant from California. So I really do get it, and there was no funding. So I understand all the pressures on families, but you know, you now have the ability to work together. So this is another way of collaboration